Okay, I should be live now. Okay. And here we go. Greetings to Telestics, Gnostics, and other people who subscribe to the channel. I certainly have some people who have been subscribed to me, I think, for a very long time, for some years. So just a shout out to people who are still kind of I guess, part of my original subscriber base, those who might still be around and still watch me when I wasn't interacting live, and just greetings to all. So I kind of opened up with that thumbnail, and if you read it, fine. If not, it's probably not. It's there at the beginning. I am the integrity you lost when you became like them. Instead of becoming truly you, I am the wild, the bold, the fearless, and the joyful part of you that will always remain silent if you do not heed me now. I like the, let's call it a kind of an iconography there. Although I find that always a little of a precarious place to go. Words like that come from their own agency, and creating images has perils. Not that they have perils because of the state of the world. Possibly, I don't know about calling it human nature, because human nature is almost part of a mythos at this point. So anyway, let me go into the live chat before I kind of go into the kind of place I might go into tonight, which is, unless something really changes, it's not one of great joy. So let me greet Madfinger and MC Wizard in Expanding the Process, and Foxadre, Meandering Mystic, and Jasmine Emmerich, RC Veronesi, G'day, and any possible lurkers out there. And again, no problem with lurking. I've been making a regular practice of lurking as of late. Hey, hello there, Toad. And so yeah, I was struggling, but finally, this just the kind of like where I was, kind of the rut I was getting stuck in was about insanity. And then I realized sanity and sanitation, because I was kind of coming to just how toxic or polluted, dirty, I come away from engaging with the world, the conversations that are occupying people's conversation time. Hello, Soul Traveler. So my audio can't imagine, once again, everything is set up real well here. If anybody else is experiencing anything, I mean, again, I'm kind of all over the place, getting audio low. Why might that be? hello. Okay, everybody, get ready. Let's see. Ugh. Okay, does that bring it up? Let me see. Let me just keep on. Hello, hello, hello. Seems like the output levels now. Oh, the output level's up there. All right. Ugh. Yeah, this'll. I don't know if that helped. Right now, preserving the desire to continue this is paramount to me. We'll just see how things go. I'm looking at my signal. I have it turned up. Yeah, I can. I guess I must be speaking low or something. Hello, hello, hello. Okay, I certainly boosted it. Lita Blue. Okay, if you have a question. Fox J. You know, it's funny. I feel in my own world, in our dreaming, I'm great. It's stepping out into the world and like, you know, kind of going in, you know, things are just the world is so out of whack with the peace that I can experience, even knowing, I mean, I can have peace and like seeing all kinds of tasks and things that happen and, you know, the challenges before us. But I can be at peace with the challenges, real challenges to real problems. I have a problem when there is so much drama around circus. Okay, Lita, what's on your mind? Hello, Mario Heat. And greetings, Lita. Or Leda. Yeah, one of the tricky things about doing a live stream is I'm kind of coming to grip. Well, first, you know, I'm looking at where much of the insanity is occurring, and it's happening. Okay, I'll be glad to address that later. Glad you put it in there. Yeah, so YouTube was kind of like, I guess certainly a more human form of social media, because we get to be able to hear voice inflection and we get to see faces. But we get that in movies too, where a lot of it is acting. The only reality is within the script. And I'm seeing a lot of scripted reality right now in the world. And some real world-class acting. on the audio-visual forms of communication utilized by, private users and big media. And things have really there's a certain, things are getting better defined. And better defined according to the reality one bases oneself in. So to me, you kind of know you're a little bit on the right track when you can observe the insanity of the whole process, and see wrong. You can see right and you can see wrong, and you can see the fact that the way correction and error. But in these things, it's not about correction and error. It's about right and wrong. And in defining what line's right or wrong, where the polarizing takes place. And then again, the scripts, the acting in the circus. I mean, it's kind of like it's this bizarre thing. It's, it's in one way, and it's like Shakespearean's all the world is a stage, but the stage is the main tent in the circus. Hello, Trey. And it is, as Fox J said, it's scripted for control purposes. They're by those who would control the masses. They kind of look at where those fault lines are, and then according to each to their own script, plays one is one side is the villain, the other side is the victim, and sometimes supporting each other in their roles, and other times just each one working their own side to declare polarized villains. And the villainy has gotten really toxic, where there's really ugly, violent, wishing people were dead. I'm not saying murderous. I'm saying just wishing people dead type of villainization. And that's that's really toxic. And again, when we look at the real problems on this planet, when we, like especially the people who are kind of behind the script writing, no anger is directed at them. All the anger is directed at the actors. Exactly how it's meant to be. The actors are paid to act. And their performances, how well they engage with the audience. But in this case, the thing is to engage the audience to want to kill each other, to want to see the other dead, at least. Archie Bunker, the TV series, was based on what political differences were like back in the day. First of all, you could share a household. You could have an ongoing kind of agreeing to disagree, the kind of bantering back and forth. But in many ways, again, it was a TV show. And actually in most households that I knew of, that kind of political bantering didn't go on. In many ways, a thing like All in the Family is kind of where it began, where it was seeded, where we look back and we go, oh, that's how it was done in the old days. Well, before, in the real old days, it wasn't like that. It wasn't a focus. It wasn't part of it wasn't part of dinner. Matter of fact, at dinner was one place usually you didn't discuss politics or religion, because both of them are based in belief, which is more often based in an emotional perception than an intellectual perception, where the belief is apprehended at the emotional level, and less apprehended. It's not like it's not, there's no intellect to it at all, but the glue, the gravitas, is in the emotional attachment to a belief. Which is why, again, usually at dinner, especially dinner parties, politics and religion in polite society couldn't go there. And part of it was the wisdom of knowing that you don't, conversation about emotionally held beliefs, I mean, that's not what conversation is about. Conversation is to engage the intellect. And of course, we want to infuse some feeling, how we feel about our ideas. But the the ideas should be at kind of like in a place where people can play instead of fight. So part of it is, social media. Especially this, I guess, the well-knowns are not anonymous, but the volume that makes up whether a known opinion gets carried is, in the retweetings and, if something goes viral. And the things that drive that are the largely anonymous people, not all of them, but, there's a lot of an anonymity. I guess in the world of integrity and honor, anonymity would work fine, because nobody would use anonymity as a way to not take responsibility for outrageous behavior. Where with honor and dignity, one would use anonymity as just simply a way of maintaining privacy, but that privacy is not a defense. It's just, your own inner sanctum, that where you kind of have your comfort zone of how public you want to be, but how you conduct yourself in public. Well, anonymous or not, honor and integrity I would think should drive one, and not whether or not one can be doxxed. And of course, I think the whole idea of doxing is, something I would only expect an alphabet agency to do. Or some other archontic system entity. Okay. Need to take, boy, this had to be the hardest show. Usually by the time I'm clicking on, I'm okay, but the toxicity of the past week or so in the public conversation area, in the agora. It's like going to, an agora, and suddenly everybody has decided the agora is the place to take their dump. And there are hot conversations going, so there's more people going to the agora and leaving their egesta. Let me get to that mute mic. Where am I? There I am. Okay. So, anyway, Later Blow asked a question. And I want to just preface it by saying that I'm answering because I've done. I mean, actually, I have a book, books written by a certain author, Anton Parks, and of his two books, in one of them, and I think in his own comment or one of the other people who reviews the book mentions John Lam Lash. I got to pull that out, and because Anton Parks, he's a Frenchman. It's Parks without it's Antonparks. No E between the K and the S, like in Simon Parks. So, and I've actually spent a fair amount of time, like a lot of us have, when it first came out. I think I read Sitchin material before I was exposed to the Not in His Image work, or when John first kind of came out. I only got Not in His Image probably about a year or so ago, but everything in it I already kind of knew. There was some more detail, how when you write a book. It was I loved getting the book. The fact that much of it was just kind of like more detail of what I was already familiar with was not. There was no downside to that. So anyway, Lita asks, are you familiar with the Tiamat creation myth? I am very curious about this. I came across this myth studying Marduk. Thanks. Well, which Tiamat myth? I think the Enuma Elish has it. I mean, I have a book here about Eden by Anton Parks, where he decodes a few different cuneiform texts, Sumerian, because they wrote in cuneiform. And, and one of the things that's interesting is, from this one you kind of get Tiamat this way and Tiamat that way. What I see in all of them, once again, when you start reading them and you know the Sophianic narrative, and you know that when these people who insert themselves into Sophia's creation, making wild claims, in the spirit, almost quite in the spirit of the demiurge, they will do as much as they can to insert themselves into some form of how different people understand how we ended up here on Earth, and our galactic connection. All the indigenous people have some, they have a galactic cosmos, and some of them are kind of strong in the Pleiades, especially the original people of Australia. But even then, even with their telling, they kind of the Pleiadians, in their telling, the Pleiadians came here, but the Anthropos was already here. So although they kind of have their and of course, I mean, you just call it my own understanding of the Sophianic narrative and what it's like to be living on a planet has the consciousness and is the body of the Aeon of wisdom herself. We're gonna. I mean, no matter how rudimentary somebody might encounter us on this planet, we have that. We have all that running through us, and it's something not running through the other anthropines because, first of all, we are a later injection. From they're 9, we're 10, on our way to 11 of the Anthropos version, and so they're going to want to. I don't want to use, because quantum physics has has its issues, but I'll just call it quantum entanglement. where it's, if you, you know, again, that, or just if you want, you know, just the kind of pleromic entanglement, where if you combine genes, then the the good effects, like the 10 to 11 that we're going through, once somebody else, if somebody else from another system comes in and engages their genes with us, they benefit. Now they sell it to us is because they might be a little bit further along in evolution, you know, intellectual evolutionary line, maybe technological, and well, you know, we'll teach you what we know, and but all I can say is they get a really good deal. So, and I don't. It seems like the Pleiadians are not behind any kind of, you know, real mischief. They just they want, you know, they want it in. They want it in on this particular divine experiment. That's just my take. This is, you know, again, I'm coming from the Sophianic narrative as far as how I'm creating this extra opinion. But again, I'm basing my opinion on the Sophianic narrative, and how these other stories might sit on it, and then the, you know, how they, and then the, you know, kind of the logical seeding of them. So Tiamat, yeah, well, Tiamat, you know, in certain cases they have Tiamat as a goddess. In Anton Park's work, he and it's, I think in his Ages of Uras, which was online, and then the guy who ran the site died, and his site died, and I haven't been able to access that information in English. Jerry Zeitlin had translated the Anton Park's Ages of Uras, and Uras is the, I guess, kind of the, let's call it the Anunnaki word for Earth. So you can Uras. It's Uras. The Ages of Uras. And then, of course, you would get Ur, you know, in Sumeria. There's all kinds of derivations there. But Tiamat, in certain cases, is, you know, kind of a, she's always generally, you know, depicted as a goddess. And there are different stories where, you know, basically seems like creation happens within her belly, and then there's a breakout. I would have to get up on it, but I am. The interesting thing on, to me, any of the twistings, or including adding on your own, kind of like, you know, adding yourself into a narrative that you don't belong in, which is what the Anunnaki did, and more than that. But I mean, in its most benign thing, they just kind of add themselves in. Certainly, and even though they might belong in a story, they kind of they write themselves in. They give themselves really good starring roles, and misrepresent themselves. Apparently, you know, in the case of the Pleiades, it seems like, you know, the way the indigenous tell it, there wasn't any real intrusion. It was kind of like a partnering, as they tell it in their mythos. But again, not to distress it. The Pleiadians didn't. There's no claim of the Pleiadians creating them. Their being able to hybridize was something that they created together, for better or worse. Certainly better for the Pleiadians. And that's, you know, I mean, to me, only up or downside, you know, to me, it was sometimes by sleight of hands, but it just could be their, you know, from their subjective point of view of them, you know, hey, you know, we're way ahead of you, so, you know, this is win-win. And I guess it, I mean, it could be called win-win, unless it isn't. And to me, the only possible loser would be the Anthropos, certainly not the Pleiadians, because again, who we are on this planet, who we are in this galaxy, only the Sophianic narrative will tell you that, actually. The only place really to get that, or else, unless you, and again, you can, I mean, the Sophianic narrative, or contacting VV herself, if you get her attention and she speaks to you, well, then you'll kind of understand it from the same perspective. although the Sophianic narrative lays out a lot for the left brain to kind of load into some memory. Where, there's words, there's language, and very often the way much of us do our psychological processing, we process words a lot. So having a language, even laid out by a third party, as the Sophianic narrative is, John is the conduit for what in a lot of ways was him getting an inload, the terma, the gift, the treasure, which he's still unpacking, and that's part of what Nembita is all about. But I might get, who knows. But anyway, with the Kalita, the Anunnaki story is not told from an honest perspective. Some parts of it are, but how they portray themselves, even who they are. Anton Parks gives them, coming from the Orion Nebula part, which makes it there are, the way the descriptions of the Sophianic narrative, of even where Sophia's plasmic plume kind of impacts, where out by the Orion Nebula. And then you have Anton Parks coming with this whole Anunnaki crew coming from that region of space. Especially the Draco reptilians being described by him there, and then you have the descriptions of, the Gnostic shamans, who describe, especially the leaders, that the archons, the rulers, not their little, kind of, neonatal, the big-headed gray-like types. The archons, the rulers, which is what the word archon means, were presented themselves kind of like Dracos. And for me, this would, again, this is not part of the Sophianic narrative, but me coming with the Sophianic narrative and Anton Parks, and it just so happens that these two separate people both talk about one thing happening in that area, and then John brings, the plume where she kind of, especially some of the extra spattering, some of her extra went, that ended up creating Yaldabaoth and the archons. And how in that whole mimicry of when they, before they kind of like took a real form, the neighborhood that they were kind of coming into being in that area where Anton Parks is saying is the home of the Draco reptilians. And then there, so to me, I actually can, because again, the archons are the great mimickers, and I can just see them kind of exploding and kind of looking for a form, and the form that they chose to mimic was the naturally occurring kind of, one of the species that had grown to kind of the intellectual place to be the dominant species in that area. And then when the archons were kind of splattered and coming into their coherence, that they chose that's what they chose to mimic. And so, but again, this is me. This is me with the Sophianic narrative going into these other stories. And having not just like read Sitchin, but spent weeks with Anton Park's story, especially the Ages of Uros. There's some material in that only confirmed to me the Sophianic myth. There are some, because when you go in there with the Sophianic myth, you see all these little pieces that seem to be insignificant, but if you kind of realize, at least the women, it seems, the Kadishtu, which are kind of like the life creators, as they were called. Apparently, they could assist because they knew how things work, and apparently they really knew something that VV, that the planetary, there was a planetary animal mother here. And even in the Eden book, when the Anthropos was coming out of the kind of forests and ruining their groves, well, basically because they were going out there because they were growing all this good stuff. It was like, the Anthropos in its native form doesn't know about private property, and so they were coming out and seeing all these lovely gardens and taking some food. But the worst thing wasn't because they didn't take everything, but they brought the wild organisms from the forest into these very pristine gardens, and the gardens didn't have any defense against it, and they died. So there's a part where the priestesses were going to go out and plant new trees. And there's a part in there, and again, somebody else might not pick up, when you come from the Sophianic narrative and you read a line where, and they prayed to the earth that she might give them seedlings. Now these are the very same type of beings that were supposedly creating the Lulu, that kind of mannish, the thing that's supposed to be us that isn't us. The Lulu, the whatever they make there. And in certain cases, it's called the Adamu. But, where was I going? Oh, yeah. But so anyways, the same group of beings that are involved with making that are actually recorded. There's a recording of them praying to the earth. They use the word that she might give them seedlings. In other words, they were praying to Mother Nature. They were praying to Sophia when they were replanting to please help. So at least the Kadistra, or the women, because supposedly in Anton Parks there were two different languages. Male spoke one language and the female spoke another language, and the common language was the male language. Okay. Hello, sunshine on Sophia. I want to stop there. I guess you kind of got me started. I probably shouldn't have gone there. All right. But I hope that, again, the Tiamat story is interesting, but you have to understand that these are insertions. And to me, the only thing that can be considered is it seems pretty clear to me that the Anunnaki stories definitely contain the creation of a Humanstein, or, a Frankenhuman. That's probably what I should have said. That I think was inserted as an infectious genetic agent. I don't know if it was done at the time as that. I have a feeling something behind that was there. But I mean, to me, it's just really clear that, again, there was something, an inferior something, kind of, and probably inspired by the magnificent form of the Anthropos on this planet. And the Anthropos had already demonstrated itself way too willful and too wild to do anything with. Just as we are supposed to be, just like, like in that opening line here. Becoming truly you. I am the wild, the bold, the fearless, and the joyful part of you that will always remain silent if you do not heed me now. So, okay. So anyway, yeah, I want to keep this, at least the telestic transmissions, I really would like to keep as clear and into walking within the Sophianic narrative. To me, there's room for these other conversations, but I wouldn't call it telestic transmissions. I would call it something else. There's a certain clarity. There's a certain, sanitation, and sanity that I want to kind of hold the line with, you know, kind of just as a nice membrane, cellular membrane of what telestic transmissions is, what is the DNA, so to speak, of a stream like this. And I think there are certain conversations that I think are fine, are actually healthy to have. But I'm not sure that I actually would like to have them more in like kind of like a Zoom room format and not necessarily public. I'm starting to really lose my stomach for the public space. The public space is starting to turn me off. Not that, you know, again, not everyone, but as a space, as far as the sanitation, no, there's shit on the walls, there's shit on the floors, there's piss everywhere. I mean, it's a fucking mess. I mean, it really is. You know, all are welcome, and some people are, you know, some people are not ready. To interact with integrity and honor. It's just not a skill that's been developed. Gotta put on my aquamarine. Okay, what's going on in the live chat? Again, you know, a lot of, you know, there's that heaviness that comes from toxicity. Okay. Oh yeah, that's the other thing. Yeah, Tiamat. According to Anton Box, Tiamat was the planet that is now the asteroid belt. That it occupied that position, and you know, Joseph Farrell actually covers that material. He may not call that planet Tiamat. He might mention that in passing. That is my understanding of like an actual what Tiamat was. And Tiamat, according to Anton Parks, was, besides a large planet, was very friendly to the more amphibious. Anton Parks goes into a pretty deep species identification, and one of the interesting things between Enki and Enlil, that duo, is I guess Enki's mother was of a amphibian branch. And the only reason I say I'm going to say this is really in passing. So basically, Enki had more of an amphibian lizard. He was like half, you know. Again, and he liked to be in the baths. And supposedly there were many underground caverns on Tiamat that made it really good for his group called the Armagi, if I recall. Armagi meant kind of an amphibious lizard, or a water-loving one. So, but the interesting thing is when you get when you get away from kind of the Anunnaki portrayals, and then you get into what might be a more morphogenetically correct portrayal of Enki, if he was, we'll treat him as a mythic character. That he was more reptilian. More amphibian. But again, he was like half and half. And there was actually an artistic rendition, and I have it on one of my computers. And when I looked, I went, ooh. And if you were a paleontology geek like me into dinosaurs, I would say look at Europs. It's probably a scientific contrivance, but it's like this kind of lizardy thing when that first emerged out of the water, according to the whole evolutionary markers that the scientists put together. And whether it's true or not, the depiction, I remember, from the books I read, really fit with how Enki was depicted by Anton Parks in his artistic representation. And again, we'll put Enki and Enlil as mythical characters here. They feature in quite a few myths. But now if we put Enki, and Enki seems to have been more like a Prometheus type thing, wanted to bring humanity was underneath him, but he was going to be a benevolent dictator or whatever. And wanted them to always do better. I mean, that's how the mythos of Enki kind of runs. And but if we once you kind of get into him, those kind of myths, and him as a teacher, and kind of creating the Lulu, not the Anthropos, the Lulu. Okay, so here we have him teaching, creating, being an amphibian type thing, and now you get into the whole new hot topic, especially as carried by Cliff High, of the Nomo, who come out of the water, some kind of fishy, sometimes a kind of amphibian, teachers, genetic upgraders, and you start seeing some commonality in these myths. So there's some interesting things, but again, it's like they can be very distracting. Because I sit very comfortably in the Sophianic narrative and in the Sophianic creation story, I can have fun entertaining these things, because I can say, oh yeah, that could kind of play out in this way. Because I feel like I'm more, I already have my aim. I'm on the path. I have my map. So I can indulge in, in a little speculation on some of these incoming stories, especially when they have things like they pray to the goddess that she might help them. Ooh, okay, let's pay a little. That's going to catch. It's going to catch a Gnostic ear. Rome going to hear that. So, but until one is kind of grounded in there, who they are and where they are and how they got here, and what's the upline, so to speak. Everybody's always concerned with the upline. Until then, and then these other things aren't like kind of like, oh gee, this kind of almost like it's like decorations on a tree. Oh yeah, this kind of like, I guess, kind of goes into that narrative, and it's in its own way. And if you need filler, if your Christmas tree needs decorations, but before one is settled, in many ways these stories become competing narratives. Oh, which one? When you kind of, when you're grounded in one that has connected you, and everything everything can make sense, including these kooky stories. Because of the Sophianic narrative, I can see, first of all, how they might sit on it, how they can parasitize off of it, and then also the what seems to me in many ways to be some serious devolution. In other words, like all the with all the genetic diseases that seem to be identified, and in some groups more than others, that's not the genome that was designed in the pleroma. To me, the genetic diseases that we see all throughout humanity, I believe, is part of a contamination from a contrived creation that could breed with the Anthropos, but was an inferior product. It was less gifted intellectually, obviously a genetic slop. And again, one of the funny things, even Cliff High brought it up, is how the Enki loved his beer. Generally, probably meant that he was bombed half the time. When you read some of these Sumerian texts, you see like these botched experiments. It was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have had so much beer when I did that one. I mean, you almost like see in these things, people are going like, oh, they're experimenting. It's just kind of like, just imagine, somebody who's buzz drunk most of the time and they're trying to remember the recipe. And then, so the whole idea basically, again, is, according to their mythos, the Igigi, and the Igigi were the low-class Anunnaki. The Igigi, according to Anton Parks, the supposedly the top, the royal Dracos were albino. And that has its own things. The warrior class was red, and they were kind of like the nobles. And then they had just your basic, reptilian, and they were green. And they're kind, so in many ways, and that's where some of the political systems that we see now, the systems of control. You have your royal line, your aristocracy, and then you got the schlubs. And so the Igigi, from what I can tell, were just basically kind of like the Greens, or the Greens who didn't have some kind of supporting role to the Reds, and they were being worked. They were basically being worked to death. And it's kind of like, hey man, we know you got this technology. Come on, whip something up here. There's all kinds of biodiversity here. It's fucking sick. Why are we still doing the grunt work? Make us a grunt. And apparently they went on strike, and so, I guess that's a joke, expanding the process. Because I'm not saying, I don't know where the green hair would come in. I'm speaking about the Igigi as being their own thing. And this is probably, something? This is probably one of the reasons. This is one of the reasons to stay on top, because again, these other ancillary possible, things. No, I'm sorry, I got too far off. Thanks for asking that question, expanding the process. You got me back on track. I was going out into stupid land. Of course, some people go, oh, that was interesting. Yeah, I know, but it's to be aimed is not to do that. That was not what I aimed to do. Actually, what tonight was about sanity and sanitation and how the difference, and I'm seeing it. Insanity feels dirty. The insanity that I'm currently seeing is toxic. And kind of like that, the observer sanity. Again, having what you feel like. You can observe and know how you feel about what you're observing. And again, it's lots of disgust is what I feel about what I'm observing, so I don't linger there. But just to contact it, it's kind of like a hangover, or you get something that really stinks real bad on you, and even though you think it's kind of like skunk. Well, the skunk isn't as unpleasant as you might think. Hello, Connie. But sometimes you just have to wait for it to wear off once you get some on you. And that's how I feel about just social media, including YouTubes. And removing the shackles did, like usually she does her own fuckers group. Those conversations are, let's say, kind of like mine, run about 2 hours, except with more voices. Although Danny does hold her share. But today she did a 7-minute one, and it was about staying off the internet, or at least the interactive internet. I mean, even just get out of that computer chair and do anything else. Clean your toilet. Yeah, welcome, Oswald. Well, it might be good that you got here late, because the earlier part wasn't one of my more Telestic hours. I'm kind of in shock from the past week, and the shock, is coming from that kind of stuff. But there's all Indonesia had a horrible tsunami. The Yemenis continue to still be bombed and starved. The earthquakes are happening. Fortunately, they have not been too devastating, but it was an earthquake that created that tsunami. So there's a lot, there's quite a bit going on in the real world. I mean, losing your loved ones, losing your town, your house, having to, wear, people are wearing the masks as they rescue their loved ones because they're already decomposing. I mean, we've all been to funerals, and then, everybody's all nice and waxy and clean smelling. I mean, imagine digging your loved one out, and they're already beginning to decompose. Hello, Shadow Self. Welcome. And yeah, so I mean, there's just and then there's this Shakespearean drama playing out on the big tent of the world circus. I mean, the United States is the big tent of the world circus. And what a shitty show. And despite the shit show itself in Washington, I mean, I'm no fan of government. To me, I look around at governments and all I see is different forms of warlords, which is kind of how they got started. I think the concept of government sucks. But I'm willing to be realistic and realize that certain governments suck more than others, but they all suck. And I'm not going to give the United States a rating, but obviously it's not the suckiest place to be. But again, this is just a matter of where you are on the suck scale. Hello, Forrest Little. And so, and also I'm about the way, not the law. But the world currently is set up in a legal web. The spiders are worse in certain places than they are in others. In this case, I hate it. I almost feel bad for Spider to cast such despicable this decomposition of the human animal. But so in many ways, again, for me, the Supreme Court, which is, yawn, gag. It's like, to me, the whole setup, it's like, ugh, just to, vaunted, ugh. I mean, anyway. So, I mean, just to kind of get my attitude on just even what everybody, what everybody, like the opinion certain people might have of something like a Supreme Court in our legal system. I mean, all right, just can I tell you, I'm just like, I just do my best to not pay it too much mind. But again, I see this shit show, this circus in the Big Tent. And usually the Big Tent, you had the main show, but no, the clowns are there, the sideshow, strange ones are there. I mean, it's interesting what I wrote, and it was, I don't have a word, and it was interesting not being able to come, because usually I can come up with a word. But I was like talking about myth. Oh, I know what I want to do. Oh, I was going to start with just a little intro, and okay, Tolkien. Let me just write that down for myself. Tolkien. Mytho-fantastic. I was thinking, when you read mythos, even the ones that are kind of, can really get rather fantastic. In many ways, that kind of fantastic, in which case you could say fantasy, where it's not about imagination. It's kind of like when imagination, sticks its, does ugly things with itself. I didn't get a metaphor here. And, can I get a metaphor? And the mytho-fan, and I'm looking out, so it's just kind of like, oh, that's just the word of mythos, and I had a pretty good little journey last night into, let's call it, let me finish this thought. So I'm looking into this kind of the circus, and in many ways it's more insane than anything in Hansel and Gretel, any fantasy work, Tolkien, and pick it, Greek myths. Zeus turning into some other thing and mating with an earth woman is like more comforting than what's going on in Washington, D.C. and in government in general. And it's just amazing how what is considered reality makes the fantastic look less fantastical. And then to see conversations that are emotionally involved, emotionally engaged, where you identify with the characters in the movie, you're emotionally invested in an actor who is putting together a scene that you're falling into, even though before the edits there's cuts here and cuts this and do it again and do it again. But while you're engaged, you would never think that there's a very possibility that this scene that you're engaged in is actually this crafted piece of work. It's more like a play, where you really get your part down, because once you're out there on the stage, there's no director going to be able to say cut. It's not a reality TV show. It's a live performance, but it's still a show. I do have Quebecois. My whole maternal side is Quebecois and Nez Perce Indian. And but you know, it's another nation, and I don't keep up really with my I mean, I love my family, and when I run into them, we hit it off like old times. But we kind of all know that. We all know that we live in different worlds. So what's going on, you know, and again, and the interesting thing, I was raised as a Francophile. My father's half French and half Scotch, Welsh, Irish. And it wasn't until I got into, you know, playing, you know, 18 and playing in bars, that I started meeting Irish people in general. We had an Irish super, and he was an unremarkable man. His wife was pretty cool. You know, she was friendly. I used to wash the halls with her, pick up a quarter or something. And yeah, a quarter for like an hour or two's worth of work. It was a good deal. But then I started going out and meeting Irish people, and finding out that besides, they certainly knew how to have fun and drink, but also the Irish intellect, you know, the Irish as thinkers, and how, you know, they just managed to kind of be who they were without making a big deal about it. And here I came from a very Francophile background, and being French was like supposed to be something special. And I just realized as much, and I was raised to, you know, because I was French, I was something to be real proud of, you know, again, as a kid. And then I decided, I think I mean, you know, I'm not going to hold anything against the French part of me, but the Irish people are kind of really not, you know, the Celtic people, but you know, especially the Irish people. And I'm Scotch, Welsh, Irish. And then I've also got a chance to meet a few real Welsh people. And boy, do I feel that at the DNA level. I feel that real palpably. Managed to meet a Welsh speaker when I was working in Omega, and she kind of gave me a little tutoring on how to you know, linguistically, or, you know, in the form of speech, negotiate the Welsh language with its spellings. One of the things I learned, and you might all be, you know, from New Age books, Llewellyn, LL, right, isn't it? I forget how it's spelled, but it starts with LL. I think it's LLEWY. Llewellyn. Llewell. I can't remember it right now. Something about it. But the double L in Welsh is kind of it's a I mean, usually like in Arabic, you know, Arabic and Hebrew, you'll get a and even in German, and I guess even in Scotch, you'll get like kind of a guttural throat or somewhere in there. But in this case, the double L in Welsh is a It's kind of like that same sound produced, but it bounces off the top, like the front of your top of your palate. There we go. So it was Llewellyn. Llewellyn is how it's pronounced. So that double L is a and then EW, and W is a double U. That's why it's Llewellyn, something like that. You know, you get the E in there, and then Y has a kind of like an or sound. and it can't have just a wind, but it's like we say, like blood wind pig. It's not right, more like a blood one pig, one. I mean, I'm nobody to be giving linguistic things. So I'm quite sure anybody else would go, "Oh, stop making ass of yourself, there, sir." Yeah, I mean, when you look at like the word, for the knot, and also the kind of written language with the straight lines and the diagonal things, that looks like ogum, Ogham, and it's pronounced ohm. And then you got, Samhain, that if you look at the spell, looks like it's spelled Samhain, but it's pronounced Samhain. So I mean, there's some interesting things going there. But it was just the Welsh. There's something very much about that Welsh DNA that that when I run into people from there, it's just like, ooh, yeah. There's a certain look too, a little bit different than the rest. Kind of suave, a little brunettish, much more leaning on the brunette. Hello, Christian Martin. So anyway, this was probably, this was a show that so far, my aim has been kind of like, I don't know, it's almost like trying to shoot after, having a bottle of wine. But I had to, find something to do to stream about. So so with Sanity and Sanitation, I mean, there's been like I said, there's been a shock. The Indonesian thing was pretty shocking at a human level. If you get out of all the stuff that where nobody's getting hurt type of stuff, especially nobody got hurt that day, and then look at how many people got killed by that wave, and then the suffering thereafter, and the loss of services, and also pain. This is the earth doing these things. This is all part of the process. And then even earthquakes, some are natural and some look like they're not. And that's some unnatural, how unnatural provocations can elicit, genuine reactions. Part of what we see in the circus. One side provokes, the other side reacts. And each one is claiming the other is the provocateur. But oh man. And then each side is playing their own victim story. And to me the victims are the American people. And the fact that there is not an identity of common decency as people. I watched two recent Krishnamurti shows. Each one was an hour, 58 minutes. And it was him engaging with, I think it was David Bohm, Rupert Sheldrake was one of them. It was a couple of guys in the fields, their different fields, with Krishnamurti, J. Krishnamurti, the one that the Theosophists wanted to make the world teacher, and he turned them down because he's an amazing man, or was. And it was just very interesting to see him. I mean, here, Rupert Sheldrake is, none of these guys, all of these guys were in their field of expertise, is an impressive intellect, and carries himself well. But when they encountered that little dragon, J. Krishnamurti, and he just busted them on all the nonsense inherent in their language, and all the false constructs that they're reacting to, and the things that get in their way, and how all this builds to make build a world at war. Just brilliant stuff, and there's 4 parts of it, and I've watched part 1 and part 2, and I have trouble watching only because, like, especially, Rupert Sheldrake, I have respect for the man. It's kind of like freshman college students engaging a course for the first time with a professor, and they have to get rid of some of the high school sophomoric information that they've been carrying around to get their wings, their dragon wings. It was almost difficult to see these esteemed writers in their own categories look silly. Their saving grace was when he called them on it. There wasn't a fierce defense of it, and he made enough sense, because he was really making sense, and they could see that although what they said initially, and that's what they thought, he would bring them up, and you see him bringing them about, and so even though initially they look a little silly, they ultimately demonstrate, in my opinion, great dignity. They stay with it. They stay with their idea, but they show, to me, they show them as seriously inquiring minds and not stuck minds. Even though they were stuck in places, when it was pointed out that there was a stuck, they looked at it and you would see them moving. It was pretty good stuff. And so, where did I find that? I guess it was posted on the One Truth forum. But boy, Krishnamurti, to me, the fact he really shows himself to have great wisdom, and once again, the Theosophists were not, thought, had their own ideas, and the fact that he said, nah, we're not doing this, to me, just showed the integrity and honor of who J. Krishnamurti was. East meets West. On something I was listening to, I think it was on Nemitta. And I think it was in the Men Here one of the talks there. A new section at the Nemitta, this Sophianic School of Arts and Sciences at nemitta.org. They're doing really well. I mean, they've gotten quite a bit done. I mean, they opened it up when they said they would, and it had its bugs and its incompletions, and what a team. I'm very impressed with the team there at Nemitta. And I won't mention any names, but the administrator there seems to be doing a very good job of administration, and kudos to you. I mean, what it'd be interesting to see just Bohm and Krishnamurti, see what topics they cover. I mean, what's really useful with him, with these people, having the credentials they have, and even like I'm talking like the human credentials where people recognize them as, you know, men of insight and intellect. And then to see Krishnamurti be able to go in there with his gentle wrecking ball, in this kind of interest, almost this kind of like a Socrates without getting to the point of being annoying. But it's a kind of a Socratic way of approaching, looking at your wisdom, looking at one's wisdom. And so when people, who might like a Rupert Sheldrake or this, and they kind of see these men go before, have a conversation with Krishnamurti, and see how these men are schooled, they're brought, they're introduced to the mystery of the Anthropos by this man in many ways, who we really are. He gets, he understands the essence of the Anthropos, and he seems, it seems like he seems to understand the essence of planet Earth, because he mentioned the Earth in a way, and who the humans, the human species is on this Earth. That primary identification, human species on the Earth, and kind of like our Earth, I think is, this is our Earth. It'd be interesting what that gentleman knew, that he just knew might be too fantastic, and the most important thing was for him to go out and gently dismantle people's cages. That's interesting, Sunshine on Sophia. So, I remember what I wanted to do. Interesting, and also listening to some of the stuff that was on, I guess the newly loaded MP3s on the Men Here part of Nemitta.org, and John mentioning he's now looking into Tartaria, which I think he will find enormously enriching, and at the same time, because there is such a scent. There's such a strong scent from that material, but there's a few scant clues, and it's kind of hard to put together. But you go, but this scent is so fresh. This is not an old scent. This scent is fresh. Which of course plays into the extended chronology to make things that were a little while ago seem like a lot while ago. So the book I have before me is called A Tolkien Miscellany. And there was a book, this has got short stories in it. And I had not read Tolkien's short stories. And this short story is called Smith of Wootton Major. Now, in this case, the smith is what the word smith always meant, was you worked iron and you made stuff. So that's what a smith That's where the word smith came from. You know, you have different words, tiller. I mean, a person's last name is what their trade was. See, in a real world, you don't have jobs. You have trades, you have skills. So, what's interesting is that these short stories do not take place in Middle Earth. These are not set in a fictional world. They go into fairy, but they are based in our Earth experience and part of our story instead of history. No, expand. This is not a story from the Silmarillion. These are just short stories. So I just want to just read the opening lines because it'll immediately put you, at least to me again, you pick up the scent and you realize that there's still some warmth there, and it's not an old scent. It's just, we've just been told through his story that this is, if not so long ago, hello Vernon, not so long ago, it's actually really a fairy tale. There was a village once, not very long ago, for those with long memories, nor very far away for those with long legs. Wootton Major it was called because it was larger than Wootton Minor, a few miles away deep in the trees. But it was not very large, though it was at that time prosperous, and a fair number of folk lived in it, good, bad, and mixed, as is usual. I'm going to stop there. That was the end of the first paragraph. That first paragraph is like loaded. And I just like to, not very far away with those with long legs. Tolkien had a great sense of humor. But it was not very large, though it was at that time prosperous, and a fair number of folk lived in it, good, bad, and mixed, as is usual. So immediately we're getting a very reasonable, real earth setting here. It was a remarkable village in its way, being well known in the country round about for the skill of its workers in various crafts, but most of all for its cooking. It had a large kitchen which belonged to the village council, and the master cook was an important person. The cook's house and the kitchen adjoined the great hall, the largest and oldest building in the place and the most beautiful. It was built of good stone and good oak, and it was well tended, though it was no longer painted or gilded as it had once been upon a time. In the hall, the villagers held their meetings and debates, and their public feasts and their family gatherings. So the cook was kept busy, since for all these occasions he had to provide suitable fare. For the festivals, of which there were many in the course of a year, the fare that was thought suitable was plentiful and rich. And it just kind of, but to me, in that very opening, that is the that is the extent of their, we can't even call it government because nobody's trying to govern anybody's thought processes. It had a large kitchen which belonged to the village council. And that's where it was. And I think somewhere in here they might mention a mayor. But this whole story goes on, and it's about people doing people things and nobody getting in the way. And nobody was getting in the way in the village that's not very long ago for those with long memories. the average attention span of today, of whatever that is. I wonder what qualifies as a long memory now. Hello, Doc. So, and the interesting thing, I mean, it's a really great story. It's about, well, there's a special festival that goes on every once in a while, and a great cake has to be made. And it's about the cooking in of a star into a cake and who receives it. And one person gets it for many years and is able to go, when they walk in the woods, and would often have encounters with the fairy, which are not these little winged creatures. They actually, when you meet them, you think they would be humans, but the laws of nature are more alive, and the people live kind of in a dreaming, magical world, but it's every bit as real as ours, just a little bit more real. And what is interesting is it appears that the Smith of Wootton Major is actually a form of an autobiographical story for J.R.R. Tolkien. Because the Silmarillion, you know, all the earlier stuff, Gondolin, the Sundering of the World, hello, enjoy being, all that stuff, the Silmarillion starts out with the Ainu Lindale. The Ainu, or Ainur, being the Aeons. Is it Ainu? Aeon? I mean, it's pretty interesting. They're singing the song of creation with the originator, who in this case is called, it has a little bit more of a kind of, because Tolkien was a Catholic, and has a little bit of a kind of like, you know, kind of a kindly guy with a beard in heaven type of thing. But it's a lot richer than that. But in many ways, because of the hands-off way of basically Iluvatar leaving it to the Ainur, or his Aeons, because that's really kind of the role they're playing in Tolkien's myth. So Tolkien, like Jung, funny, both of them had their red book, and both of their red books are really about their mystical encounters that they had. One could call them trance states, but they were trance states in the waking world. The Lord of the Rings was basically kind of like a fictional story. So that, you know, because Tolkien wanted, you know, some kind of commercial success. In many ways, Lord of the Rings was a crafting of a fictional story based on the mythos of this world that he had was able to gain access to for many years of his life, and apparently it started around either 1913, I think, or maybe during the war years. It was, you know, in the early 1900s, and apparently it lasted for some decades, or at least, you know, for some time. And I think for Jung, I think it was a slightly shorter period, but it was actually, there seemed to be a point where each one of them had kind of their time of being access to the fairy, the world of fairy, was over. And the kind of the gist of the story of Smith of Wootton Major is the person who gets the star. I won't identify the characters. At one point, while he's visiting fairy, and finally he had interfaced with somebody who he just was very delightful. And then he later finds out she's the queen of the fairy. And then she gives him a message for the king of the fairy, who is another very unassuming character who actually had played a part as almost as a human. But anyway, what it was is it was his time. It was like this little fairy star that he had pressed onto his forehead that he had gotten out of the cake. And that gave him access. And basically he was told that he had to, it was time for him to give it up, that somebody else would then get it and have access to their world. And I have not yet read The Fall of Gondolin. So on my list of Silmarillion parts to read, or in Unfinished Tales. I don't have all of them. I have a fair amount of them. And so that's what this, in many ways, what happened with Tolkien, one of the reasons so much of his work was unfinished, was he was still getting the stories. And anybody who does like regular kind of trance work and shamanic know that while you're there, it's really clear. And then you transition back and some of it stays, but not all of it. And you kind of like have to do repeat version until you kind of like more of it sticks, or else you just bring back what sticks, you write it down, and then you go get that same package again, but you let other things stick, and little by little you cobble it, the map together. And but all of a sudden, almost like this smith who had to give up the star, that so that it could be baked into another cake, and that somebody else it could come upon. And they even discuss who would probably be the next person that would end up getting it, or who they thought would get it. It was it's a really interesting story. But really, apparently, it all boils down to Tolkien's own experience with having gotten that star somehow and access. And then when he lost access, and that's why so much of the tale, even though there was years, I mean, after he lost access, he was still around probably for another couple of decades. But now he only had his memories, and trying to pull the stories back from the memories he had, because he no longer had access. And apparently, and the same thing apparently happened to Jung. This world that he was accessing and getting all this archetypal material from, one day was just closed. Oh, I've seen her work. Yes. That was I think it was probably her or somebody else speaking, but I think it was her, where I became aware that Tolkien had a red book. And also being reminded that Jung had a red book. And how basically each red book was kind of where the least amount of self-editing happened, where they kind of preserved what they were really going through. If I recall, Madfinger, there was like somebody, that he had potential, like he had a potential to go two ways, where on the outer he looked like he could just be, kind of, I don't know, a Dorito eater, but apparently they felt he had potential, if I recall correctly. So Sanity and Sanitation. I think they share a root, because they basically are saying, sanity is sanitation of the psyche. There's like no, well, how would you describe sanity? It's hygienic. It's hygienic psyche. It's a clean psyche. And just think about a desk where that's all cluttered up. There could be something you're looking for. It's under 2 layers of whatever. Sometimes our psyches can be like that, a clean psyche, with things that you are aware of where stuff is. And if it is buried under 2 layers, you remember that. There can be a certain amount of order to what looks like disorder, but only the person that owns that landscape, that landscape of the psyche, will know whether or not there's an organization to what might not be immaculately clean. I mean, and I look at nature. Nature isn't a raked pathway. It's a well-trod pathway. Is how you maintain a pathway. I mean, you might do something, but it's not all. It doesn't need to be. It's going to have a certain amount of twigs that fall down, whatever, and you can pick them up after a bit. I mean, there's some, but it's not like this. Immaculate. There's a certain little bit of fresh debris that happens even in a clean environment. But and to me, so how would I cry insanity? An unclean, an unsanitary, a toxic environment for the psyche. And social media is toxic. It's being contributed to by thousands of people who eat toxic food, drink toxic water, are fed toxic thoughts on purpose. Two conversations that create a schizophrenia in one national psyche. What's interesting about reading a story like the Smith of Wootton Major, as you said, there were people, good and bad mixed, as is usual, but they're able to work it out. And one of the reasons people are usually able to work it out is there's no righteous third party, kind of like a government, or somebody who holds the pretense of being morally superior to everybody else. The third party, supposedly the disinterested, blind justice and all the rest of that. Justice really means punishment or vengeance. If somebody gets released from being held because they were wrongly accused, rarely will you hear that "let justice be done." It's usually when an execution or something nasty has happened, "let justice be done." Or you have an army who is going to, or just a group of people, or one person going to, feel wronged, and now they're going to avenge that wrong. Let justice be done. Justice is so tied up with punishment. But there is balance. There is the Tao, the way. There is error and correction. Correction is not about vengeance. correction is about correcting error. It seeks to retrieve and kind of, reclaim any part of itself that has fallen out of coherence. I would hope not, Oswald. I really would think sanity and sanitation have their root in that. Because saint, please don't get me started on that word. But it could. Yeah, I agree with that, Fox or Dre. Again, it seems to me the things that usually prevents any time that the human animal has a beef with another human animal, or one group of human animals with another, is when there is this righteous third party that will serve as the, I don't know, mediator, some cases judge, the family counselor. And very often, those righteous third parties have been waiting for that insertion event. Because that is how what isn't human intrudes into what is human. Yeah. So, sanity. Yeah, Danny had a great message. She made it alone. Avoid social media. A left-hand path and a right-hand path, huh? Said the word right, from what I can tell of, the only proper understanding of the word right is derivative of ritual. There's correct, and then we have our rituals. And sometimes we will, as the traditions allow, hold us together, we invoke our rituals or our rites, our agreements, our sacred agreements with each other. Yeah, Sadashi has been a really welcome Dakini and lunar cycle for me. I needed her. Really quite a different quality for me than our other Dakinis, especially after Baivari. Although Baivari was more purr than growl in my experience, in my own dreaming, the world of my dreaming. Sadashi, been like a little bit of a hermit time for me with her. I find a certain amount of support for, let's say, a lunar cycle of being kind of hermit-like. And I think it's in that this hermit kind of mode I'm in that, you know, it's like the web becomes so glaringly toxic for me. It's might even, there's a good chance there's a certain magnification of the perception of its toxic nature, because from the beauty of the hermitage, and not one that is certainly not at all removed from the challenges, but the challenges are the ones that are creating the challenges that people think, that we all think we're involved in. The ones who create the divisive narratives, the ones who are behind the scripting of it all, the funding of the scripting, the payment of actors. And I mean the whole circus. You know, there may be two families in a story of Romeo and Juliet, but it's one play. And there's one director for the play. So I think this is about as far as I can take this stream tonight. I'm a little concerned as to how, you know, how good, you know, whether or not not doing a stream might have resulted in a higher quality night, but it is what it is at this point. So, but you know, energies are shifting. This was just and this was again during this really kind of what I've been finding as a very pleasant retreat. Coming out of the retreat is just shocking. Shocking like ice cold sewer water. But anyway, I'm going to say goodnight to you all, and thank you for joining me.